I truly, truly love that girl.
What is it that torments you the most right now?
What Audrey went through in the murder keeps me awake at night.
Those were the choking words of a father. Simple words, but filled with a pain that no words can describe. Because perhaps nothing can break a heart more than losing a child that you once cherished, loved, and placed all your hopes in the future ahead. The story begins on a normal evening like any other in a small town called Arena, located along a peaceful river in Australia. There, everyone knows each other, winding roads lead through vast fields, and the atmosphere is always quiet and peaceful. But sometimes it is in that peace that the most unpredictable things are hidden. Audrey Griffin, a 19-year-old girl, is dynamic and full of determination. She is not only the pride of her family, but also a bright light in the eyes of her friends. Audrey is passionate about sports, has competed in international triathlons, and above all, she has been accepted into the Navy to begin her journey to serve her country. Before embarking on a new chapter in her life, Audrey decided to return to her hometown to spend some quality time with her family and friends, the people she loved the most. That night was a warm farewell party, laughter, hugs, and wishes of good luck. No one knew that it would be the last time they would see that radiant smile. The peaceful atmosphere was quickly torn apart by something that no one could explain. That night, what really happened? On March 21st, 2025, the sunset fell over the small town of Arena as usual, signaling the end of a peaceful day. For Audrey Griffin, it was a special day. She had just spent time visiting her grandfather in the hospital, then met up with a group of close friends at a nearby bar to hold a farewell party before she officially left to join the Navy. None of them could have expected that the laughter that echoed that night would soon be replaced by tears that could never be wiped away. That night, the atmosphere in Arena carried a familiar stillness, but there was also something unusual that no one noticed. Around 2 a.m., after saying goodbye to her friends, Audrey walked out of the bar. She opened the taxi hailing app but couldn't connect to any. Instead of waiting in vain, Audrey decided to walk along the deserted road herself, heading towards her father's house just a few kilometers away. Her footsteps echoed quietly on the damp ground, illuminated only by the sparse streetlights. There were no obvious signs of danger. Everything seemed so normal that no one was alert. But in the middle of that night, someone else was also moving. A figure, silently, a few hundred meters away, following her every step. On some surveillance cameras on the side of the road, people later saw clearly Audrey walking, her eyes still full of determination and calm. Behind her, a strange man briefly appeared in the frame, looking furtive and uneasy. But at that time, no one paid attention to that detail. No one warned her. No one knew that danger was approaching. The time between 2:15 and 3 a.m. was a hazy void. There were only a few scattered clues. A resident near the river reported hearing a piercing scream in the night, a sound they initially thought was just the cry of a wild animal. Another, while walking his dog, felt uneasy when he passed a man with an unusual expression, his face tense, his demeanor uncertain. The signs at that moment were too vague for anyone to connect into a clear premonition. Audrey had no idea she was being followed. No one realized that the familiar path would become her last. And then all traces fell silent. The sky remained dark, the river still flowed, but something terrible had happened in that darkness. Something that would shock the entire country as the truth gradually emerged. On the morning of March 22, 2025, the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees of the town of Arena. Everything was going as usual, until a mother woke up with an indescribable feeling weighing on her heart. Having not heard from her daughter since the party last night, she opened the app to track Audrey Griffin's phone, a small habit that gave her peace of mind whenever her daughter was out late. But the screen popped up and her heart sank. The green dot, the symbol of Audrey's location, was still standing motionless. near a deserted stretch of river, far from the house where she was supposed to return. She tried calling. No one answered. Messages went unanswered. In a panic, she immediately contacted Audrey's father, who was in Arena. His answer only added to her worries. Audrey had never been home. Maybe she had stayed at a friend's house? They quickly called to verify, but no one had seen her since the party. At this point, everyone began to realize that something was seriously wrong. A group of friends and family rushed out into the street, following the last location of the phone they could determine. The destination was a quiet stretch of riverbank that no one thought could be related to the young girl. They walked in silence, their eyes scanning the grass, hoping for the smallest glimmer of hope. Then they saw it, a handbag. Next, a familiar hair clip that Audrey often wore. The father's heart stopped as he bent down to pick up the items. No one needed to say anything. Fear quietly filled the air. The emergency call was made immediately. The 000 call center received the call, and the police quickly arrived at the scene. The atmosphere was heavy and tense. Everyone stood still on the riverbank, where the water flowed slowly, carrying invisible hauntings. The rescue team began to scan the area. And then, one of the police officers spotted a strange object floating on the water. As they got closer, the truth became undeniable. It was a human body. The crowd standing on the shore immediately broke into sobs. The father collapsed, his hands shaking, without needing to look closely to know that it was his daughter. Audrey was pulled to the shore in a suffocating silence. No one spoke. The police quickly sealed off the scene, but the desperate eyes knew that, from this moment on, things would never be the same again. Last night, something terrible had happened, and this morning, a family's world was torn apart forever. The riverbank where Audrey Griffin's body was found seemed to bear little in the way of obvious clues. The ground was muddy, footprints were mixed in with the weeds, and only a few scattered personal belongings remained. A handbag, a hair clip, and a phone partially buried in the wet mud. Everything seemed simple, as if an unfortunate accident had happened in the dark of night. But her loved ones, from the very first moment, sensed that something was wrong. The forensic team quickly moved in, starting the process of examining the scene and the body. While the riverbank was cordoned off to search for any further evidence, Audrey's body was carefully examined. Initial results indicated that she had died of drowning, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. It didn't take long for experts to notice a series of unexplained marks. On Audrey's arms, there were long scratches that suggested she had struggled or been dragged. Her face also bore light scratches, enough to suggest a struggle or scuffle before she lost consciousness. But what caught the investigators' attention the most were the tiny marks under her fingernails, skin samples that didn't belong to Audrey. No cameras recorded those final moments, but the details of the girl's body spoke for themselves in the silence of the scene. Forensic doctors concluded that the time of death occurred shortly after Audrey left the bar. That confirmed the gap between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. as the most important link. The unexpected clue came from the coat Audrey wore that night. It was torn at the shoulders and sleeves, not consistent with a simple accident. Coupled with the analysis of the fingernails, the investigation team was forced to confront the possibility that this was not an accidental death, but the marks of a deliberate attack. The initial silence was gradually replaced by a barrage of questions. Another story, darker and more complex, began to unfold. At first, Audrey Griffin's death was considered a tragic accident, but her family's strong premonition and unusual clues forced the police to reopen the case. A full investigation began, quietly but fiercely, under pressure not only from the victim's family, but also from the local community, whose peace had been shattered by an unforeseen tragedy. The first clues came from the footage extracted from the camera system along the path Audrey had walked that night. The image was not clear, but enough to recognize the silhouette of a strange man walking a few hundred meters away, following her every step. The investigators patiently reviewed each frame, each street, until they clearly identified. The person had continuously appeared on at least 3 different cameras, always keeping a distance, but not taking his eyes off the young girl. They did not stop there, but went to the people living near the area where the incident occurred. One witness recalled that at around 3 a.m., he heard a high-pitched scream coming from the riverbank. At that time, he thought it was the cry of a wild animal and did not pay much attention. Another person, a man walking his dog at night, also recounted that he felt uneasy when he accidentally passed by a man who looked restless and anxious. This detail, which initially seemed insignificant, now became an important link in the process of solving the case. All the testimonies pointed in the same direction: the presence of an unidentified man at a key time and place. Police immediately expanded their search for the suspect's identity and sent a DNA sample taken from under Audrey's fingernails for analysis. Soon the results returned a new twist. The DNA matched Adrian Torin, a 53-year-old man with a history of violence and repeated run-ins with the law. But an identity wasn't enough. Police needed more evidence to ensure their case would stand up in court. They continued to review other surveillance cameras, tracing the suspect's movements on the fateful night. It became clear Adrian Torin had followed Audrey almost the entire way she walked home. With enough evidence, police arrested Torin in Sydney. It was a gloomy morning. The man was handcuffed and escorted to the police station in silence. Investigators immediately began questioning him. Initially, Torin denied any involvement. He claimed he did not know Audrey and was not present at the scene. But every little detail in his testimony gradually became inconsistent when compared with the evidence. When asked about the time between 2 and 3 a.m., the gap the police were targeting, Torin faltered and could not provide a reasonable explanation. The psychological pressure began to wear on his patience. Using a skillful interrogation tactic, the investigators kept asking key questions, gradually removing his defenses. When he learned that his DNA had been found under the victim's fingernails, Torin fell silent. Although he did not admit it directly, his bewildered eyes and panicked expression somewhat confirmed the suspicions. While waiting for an official confession, the police accidentally collected an undeniable piece of evidence. In a monitored phone call before his arrest, Torin accidentally admitted that there was something inside him that made him lose control of himself. That was the final piece needed to close the crime scene. The case was then fully consolidated with forensic records, witness statements, and camera footage. The investigation, from the initial suspicions to the moment the suspect was handcuffed, was a testament to the perseverance and tireless efforts of the authorities. However, the case did not end there, because the biggest question, why, remained unanswered. And justice, even if served, could not ease the pain that the victim's family would have to endure for the rest of their lives. The trial for Audrey Griffin's death never happened. The justice that her family in Australia had been waiting for never came, because suspect Adrian Torin was never held accountable for his actions. Just 3 days after his arrest, Torin was found unconscious in his cell and died despite emergency treatment. Officially, it was his own fault. The sudden death not only added to Audrey's family's grief, it also crushed any hope of finding answers. There was no trial, no testimony, no chance for relatives to stand trial to seek justice for the young woman. There was widespread outrage that a man with a history of violence, who had been accused of threats, had been allowed to go free and had so easily taken the life of an innocent person. Torin's death sparked a wave of calls for change. Audrey's family, in their grief, still spoke out to demand stricter legal measures to protect women from violence and dangerous criminals. A resolution in her name was introduced in Congress. At the river where Audrey was found, hundreds of people threw flowers into the water in a quiet memorial. Audrey's mother choked up, saying, "We didn't get justice, but she will never be forgotten." The passing of Audrey Griffin was not only an irreparable loss for her family, but also a deep cut in the heart of an entire community. A young girl, full of passion, full of ambition, was unable to complete her life's journey because of the indifference and laxity of a system that had the chance to prevent this crime early. That pain is still there, quiet but persistent. Every parent, every friend, every citizen has the right to ask, what can we do differently to prevent tragedies like this from happening again? Audrey's case not only ended with a verdict, but also opened a broader wake-up call. that safety cannot be taken for granted, that every act of violence, no matter how small or fleeting, if ignored, can lead to irreversible consequences, and that justice should not be an afterthought, but a wall that protects the innocent from the start. It is also a time for each of us to reflect. Has society done enough to protect the vulnerable? Are the laws strict enough to stop repeat offenders? And most importantly, are we brave enough to speak up when we see even the smallest signs of danger? What do you think? What needs to change so that stories like Audrey's will forever be in our memories? Fairfield, California. Early morning, October 30th, 2021, just hours after Halloween. The air was chilly, and fog lingered on the small streets. In a well-appointed home near Travis Air Force Base, the curtains were still drawn from the night before. A weak ray of sunlight filtered through the frosted glass, but inside and everything was eerily still. A bedroom smelled of perfume. A Halloween costume was still draped over a chair. A phone fell to the floor, the screen off. On the bed, a young woman lay still, her body devoid of warmth, as if time had stopped the night before. The girl was Leilani Marie Beauchamp, a 19-year-old college student from Carmel. Friends described her as fun-loving, affectionate, and a pleasure to be around. The night before, she had attended a Halloween party with a new friend, a night that should have been harmless. There was no sign of a fight, no broken door, no screams. But on the floor at the edge of the carpet was a small dried blood stain. No one knew when it had appeared. The nightstand drawer was ajar, a gun inside. No one in the house had admitted to owning it. The party had all gone. All that remained was cold testimony and a series of details that didn't match. The story was an accident, but the room said otherwise. The location of the blood, the body position, the unknown gun. Something was wrong, and it wasn't the scene, it was the story. If it was all accidental, why didn't the testimony match the blood on the floor? On the night of October 29th, 2021, a Halloween party was held at an apartment not far from Travis Air Force Base. Lights flickered from the backyard, music played, and the laughter of young people was loud. Among them was a 19-year-old girl named Leilani. Bright costumes, bright smiles, and a group of new friends. As the night wore on, the party fizzled out. Some guests left, others went on to other dates. Leilani was last seen leaving the house with two men in military uniform, one of whom was the owner of the apartment in Fairfield. They were not close friends, but they seemed to have talked long enough to gain trust. At the new apartment, the lights were still on. Leilani went inside, took off her costume, and by all accounts, everything seemed normal. There were no quarrels, no strange noises, and the neighbors next door heard nothing unusual. But it was that silence, in what should have been a cozy space after a party, that made everything that followed difficult to explain. By dawn, only a few people were left in the house. Those who were there said they had fallen asleep from exhaustion. No one knew exactly when things had gone wrong, but one thing was certain. By the time the sun came up, Leilani was no longer alive. Those present gave inconsistent explanations. One said she had fallen asleep alone in her room. Another said she had been awake when they had gone to bed. A third, while not admitting to witnessing anything specific, mentioned a crash-like sound around 6 a.m. No one pressed that. No one elaborated. While the testimonies flowed lightly, the scene held every detail. A chair tipped over, a faint scratch on the wall, a pillow out of place. Small details seemingly accidental, but not consistent with any of the accounts. And then something strange happened. An uninvited guest, not on the guest list, not known to any of Leilani's friends. But a neighbor's security camera captured the person's appearance around dawn, just minutes before life in the room ended. No one spoke. No one said why. But that unexpected appearance in the middle of a quiet morning was like the first piece of a tragedy that had begun long before. That morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, the house in Fairfield was strangely quiet. One of the people who had been there the night before was a young man in military uniform who walked out of the room with a tense expression. He slowly walked toward the bedroom at the end of the hall, where Leilani should still be sleeping. The door opened slightly. Inside, Leilani lay motionless on the bed. Her face was unbelievably calm, as if she were just sleeping. But something was wrong. Her skin had begun to change color. The air in the room was thick. The young man stepped back, his hands shaking, then quickly turned and ran outside. Not long after, the emergency call was made. A man's voice came over the central phone. "I think someone's dead in the house. A girl. She's unresponsive." There was no panic, no crying. The voice, decisive even, left an eerie impression on the operator. Less than 10 minutes later, the police car arrived. Firefighters and paramedics were on the scene immediately. They entered the house without breaking the lock. The door was open, the living room undisturbed. Everything seemed to be in its place. As the investigation team approached the back room, the scene was clear. A female body lying neatly, no sign of struggle. However, the anomaly began to emerge when the forensic officer bent down next to the bed. There was a faint blood stain on the carpet and next to the open drawer, a bruise clearly visible on the bedpost. A police officer quietly took notes, his eyes lingering on a detail. There was no sign of disorder in the room, but a high-heeled shoe was left in the middle of the walkway, as if someone had left in a hurry. There was no victim's phone, no wallet, no sign that anyone had called an ambulance immediately after the incident. While the investigation team was trying to reconstruct the young woman's final hours, the original caller remained at the scene, cooperating with the police. He appeared calm, recounting every step, every detail, as if he were just an unrelated witness. But then a police officer noticed a slight discrepancy in his story. The time he said he last saw the victim, completely inconsistent with the time of death estimated by the medical examiner. That small detail, initially overlooked, ended up being the first turning point of the entire investigation, because the caller that day was not telling the whole truth. When the forensic staff entered the room, they kept absolutely silent. No one spoke, but all eyes were fixed on the body lying still on the bed. The girl, Leilani, was found motionless, her arms at her sides, her head resting on a deeply sunken pillow. There was no sign of struggle, no blood was flowing, but the silence made everyone more alert. The preliminary examination noted signs of mild internal injuries to the chest, a faint purple bruise on the right wrist, and, most notably, a wound to the lower back. The forensic staff immediately raised suspicions. The victim was right-handed, but the hematoma was concentrated in the opposite direction of the normal defensive reflex. In addition, there was a layer of mild detergent on the skin, as if someone had tried to clean the body. The floor was examined under ultraviolet light. In the dim purple light, the long streaks were clearly visible. A faint trail of blood led from the bedside to the door, where it was blocked by a small gray shag rug. When the technicians lifted the rug slightly, they found a dried blood stain underneath, deep, seeping into the floorboards. The facts began to fall apart. The first person to discover the body said he had not touched the body, had not moved the furniture. But how could there be blood under the rug when the floor around it was clean, as if it had just been mopped? The laundry room at the back of the house added another layer of mystery. A white towel, still damp, lay in the trash, stained reddish-brown. Nearby, a pair of latex gloves had been turned inside out. All of this suggested something no one wanted to believe, that the scene had been tampered with after the fact. Why had the body been mopped, but there was still blood under the carpet? That question haunted the investigators throughout the first hours, because it was not just a strange detail, but could be the key to unlocking the whole truth hidden in the dark. Immediately after the preliminary examination was completed, the investigation team was ordered to stay at the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, no eyewitnesses, and no widespread bloodstains. But every little detail was opening up a chain of big questions. Leilani had not died in an accident. That was the first thing the police confirmed. A list of people who had been at the party that night was quickly compiled. Of these, 3 names stood out. The host, a soldier serving at Travis, a friend who had accompanied him, and a guest who had unexpectedly appeared the next morning, captured on a neighbor's security camera. The investigators began to reconstruct the timeline, from the time Leilani left the main party to her arrival at the apartment in Fairfield. It was not far, only a 20-minute drive. Neighbors reported hearing a slight noise around 6 a.m. Not a gunshot, but something like someone dropping something heavy. But the route map from the victim's phone showed the last signal stopping at 5:41 a.m. The police decided to call them in one by one. The friend who was with them, a thin, light-skinned young man, was cooperative. He said he had slept on the sofa, heard nothing, and woke up only when the homeowner woke him up after finding Leilani unresponsive. He was allowed to leave after a few hours of questioning. The focus shifted to the homeowner. He was the last person seen with the victim and the one who called the police. His name was Juan. Calm, deep-voiced, polite. But there was something in his eyes that made the investigators hesitate. Juan's account was clear. He said Leilani was too tired to sleep. They just lay next to each other. He fell asleep, then woke up in the morning and found her motionless. The story sounded plausible, but it didn't add up. Leilani's phone records showed the last texting app was opened at 5:18 a.m. Juan, meanwhile, said he woke up around 6 a.m. and hadn't heard anything. A few hours later, the forensics team announced the estimated time of death, 5:30 a.m. The difference was only a few minutes, but in a crime, it was a whole new window. The investigators returned to question Juan a second time. This time, they used psychological baiting tactics. "Are you sure no one else came to the house that morning?" Juan shook his head. A minute later, the police showed a photo from a neighbor's surveillance camera. A black SUV pulled up in front of his house at 5:27 a.m. Juan's eyes changed. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "That's my old friend. She came because she left something behind last time." The police asked, "Who is she?" Juan replied, "Jessica. She only came for a few minutes and then left." At this point, the name Jessica officially appeared in the case file. No one thought she was involved, even less that she had ever had a relationship with Juan. But in the background investigation, a prominent detail appeared. Jessica was dating the victim's younger brother. The police decided to call her in to clarify. Jessica walked into the interrogation room with a calm face, light makeup, and the opening statement. "I heard that Leilani had an accident. I was shocked too." But her eyes did not meet anyone in the room. The investigator let her speak first without interrupting. Jessica said that she had just stopped by to get her coat, and when she saw that everyone was still asleep, she left. At this point, an investigator pulled out a photo of the bloodstain on the carpet from the file. They said nothing, just placed the photo on the table. Jessica glanced at it for a second, then she lowered her head. No one pressed, but they knew something was afoot. The second hour passed. A police officer asked gently, "Do you know where Leilani was in the room when you arrived?" Jessica raised her head. "I didn't go into the bedroom." The answer raised eyebrows. Juan's testimony, meanwhile, said otherwise. "She did go in, but only for a few minutes." This contradiction was noted, but what puzzled the police even more was the unusual agreement between Juan and Jessica. Both of them tried to minimize each other's role, as if they were covering up something bigger. And then the first twist appeared. After seizing the neighbor's car's dash cam, the technical team extracted a blurry image, but enough to see a figure entering the house, carrying something that looked like a handbag. A few minutes later, this person came out, but not with one hand, but with two hands, dragging something heavy. Then the black SUV left. At first, the police thought the person in the photo was Juan, but when analyzing the gait, height, and shoe model, all matched Jessica. The person the police first suspected, Juan, was actually a witness who was manipulated. He was present, knew about the incident, but was not the perpetrator. And Jessica, who seemed to be just the victim's brother's girlfriend, was the central link. When she was called in for a second interrogation, Jessica was silent for a while longer. No denial, no confirmation. But the coldness in her eyes gradually disappeared. It was then that one of the investigators said quietly, "We know who fired the shots. But what we want to know is why. That question did not require an immediate answer, but it marked a complete change in the direction of the investigation. An unexpected turn, the first suspect was completely innocent. The Solano County courtroom was packed the morning the trial began. Reporters crowded in with the victim's family, and the back row was filled with friends of the defendant. The tension was palpable, though no one had said a word. Jessica Quintanilla walked in wearing a beige prison jumpsuit, her hands cuffed to her waist. She didn't turn her head, didn't look for any familiar eyes on the stand. Her face was as cold as a sheet of paper. That gaze had remained the same throughout the trial, except for a brief moment when images of Leilani's body were shown. The prosecutor opened with a sharp argument. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate act, done in a fit of jealousy and anger. But emotions are not an excuse to avoid the consequences. The defense countered, "There is no direct evidence that she pulled the trigger. It could have been a reflexive act of self-defense, or it could have been a sudden collision." But then a new witness was called. The man was not on the original list. He was a unit mate of Juan's, and he had heard, the day after the incident, that Juan was afraid of Jessica because she came with a gun and threatened everyone if she told the truth. The moment the witness said that, the room fell silent. Jessica raised her head and looked straight at the man, her eyes changing for the first time. The prosecution seized the opportunity. They presented the entire chain of evidence, from the blood on the carpet, the bleach on the body, to the time Jessica's car arrived at the exact time the coroner determined she had died. When she was called to the stand to address the jury, Jessica, after days of silence, suddenly changed her testimony. She admitted that she had entered the room, had seen Leilani, and had brought the gun just to threaten. But she said it had all happened faster than she thought. The belated admission did not save her from the conclusion. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. First-degree murder. The verdict, 25 years to life in prison. Her brother Marco, who had helped hide the body and destroy evidence, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for accessory after the fact. Outside the courthouse, Leilani's family hugged each other in tears. A reporter asked the victim's grandmother how she felt. She did not answer, but placed her hand on her heart and said softly, "My grandson deserves to rest in peace." The community reacted strongly. Many expressed their grief that the killer not only knew the victim, but had also entered her own family as a relative. Questions about trust, affection, and the limits of emotion once again were put on the public scale. The case is closed, but its echoes still resonate in the hearts of those who remain. A 19-year-old girl, beautiful, intelligent, and full of ambition, left without saying goodbye, just because of jealousy hidden behind a seemingly familiar face. The family lost a child, a sister, a niece, unfinished dreams, meals without a person, and photos that have not yet been printed have become lifelong regrets. But that pain does not stop at the bloodline. It spreads to the question of trust, that sometimes the people we think are closest can be the ones who bring unexpected danger. Jessica is not a stranger. She entered the Leilani family as a relative, as a part of everyday life. And then from that very close place, tragedy struck. We live in a world where uncontrolled emotions can become dangerous weapons. Jealousy, if not recognized and handled properly, can destroy even relationships that were built on love. The law can give a verdict, but only the morality and sobriety of each person can prevent similar incidents from happening again. And then the final question quietly rings out. If it were you, would you trust the person you love? Knoxville, Tennessee. Monday morning, November 21st, 2016. Emma locked her door from the inside. That morning, her mother kept calling her daughter to get up for school as usual. She knocked, called her name, and finally broke the lock to enter. The room was neat, sunlight was shining through the curtains. Emma lay still on the bed as if she were fast asleep. But just a few seconds later, everything fell apart. Emma was no longer breathing. No one saw any signs of a struggle. The door was not broken. The bedroom had not been heard from the night before. Even when the police arrived, the scene was almost intact, except for one small detail that no one expected: a very thin hole in the wall, right next to the bed. Emma Jane Walker, 16 years old, excellent student, talented cheerleader, and the family's only daughter, passed away to the shock of the whole community. Just a few days ago, she was happily hanging out with her friends at school, wearing her cheerleading uniform, cheering for the football team, where her ex-boyfriend, William Riley Gall, was playing. No one expected that. Right behind the stadium lights, there would be a chain of tension, threats, and control, things that would lead to an unforeseen tragedy. And then, from a tiny bullet hole in the wall, the biggest secret in Emma's life began to be revealed. Little did Emma Jane Walker know that that night would be the last night she would sleep peacefully in her familiar room. A few weeks ago, she and William Riley Gall, her ex-boyfriend, officially ended their 2-year relationship. Although they had been a popular couple at school, their relationship had become strained. William was often jealous, controlling, and constantly texted Emma when she didn't respond in time. Family and friends noticed something was wrong and advised Emma to keep her distance. She listened. However, William did not accept the breakup easily. He began to act strangely, pretending to be harmed to attract attention, even sending mysterious messages about being threatened. At the same time, Emma told her relatives that a stranger dressed in black appeared in front of her house, knocked on the door at night, and then disappeared. Those signs made Emma worried, but she did not report it to the police because she did not have specific evidence. On Sunday evening, November 20th, 2016, Emma had dinner with her parents, then went to her room as usual. She locked the door, texted a few friends, and went to sleep. No one in the house heard any unusual noises throughout the night. Around midnight, outside the house, a dark figure quietly approached Emma's bedroom window. The person was carrying a metal object, standing still in the dark and doing his thing. 2 small sounds echoed in the night. From inside, everything was still silent. Emma had passed away in her own home, without anyone hearing anything. No one had witnessed it directly, but the small clues, the overlooked details, finally began to paint a portrait of someone who had planned it all along. Monday morning began like any other in the small house in Knoxville. Emma's mother, accustomed to her daughter waking up early to get ready for school, began to worry as the hours passed and Emma's room remained locked. She knocked on the door, calling her daughter's name, repeating it over and over again, but received no response. The feeling of unease grew stronger. When the call was still silent, she mustered up the courage to unlock the door, but it was locked from the inside. Somehow she broke the latch, pushed the door open, and entered the room. Before her eyes was a familiar sight: a neat room, soft light streaming through the curtains, a neatly arranged pillow. She lay still, motionless in the quiet room. At first glance, she looked like she was resting, but seconds later, the mother was horrified to realize that her daughter was no longer responding. The family immediately called an ambulance. The 911 call was recorded as a frantic, trembling mother in a panic. Paramedics were dispatched immediately, followed by the local police. When the first responders entered, they left the room as it was, avoiding disturbances. There was no sign of disorder, no blood, no alarms. The body was found lying on its back, the bedding neatly arranged, almost undisturbed. Investigators concluded that the incident occurred while Emma was unprepared, possibly while she was sleeping. During their initial inspection, investigators noticed an unusual detail. On the wall near the head of the bed, they noticed an unusual spot. What looked like a small peeling of paint, but was actually a mark of an external force. Outside the window, the police found 2 small metal casings lying in the middle of the lawn. That's when the first theory was formed. Someone had stood outside the window and done something through the wall. The information was quickly relayed to headquarters. Police cordoned off the area, recorded every detail, and seized evidence. Meanwhile, news of Emma's sudden passing spread throughout the school, leaving students, teachers, and the community in a state of shock. A beloved, exemplary girl was gone, and the cause until then was still a big question mark. After staking out the area around the house, the investigation team began a thorough search of every detail inside and outside Emma's bedroom. There were no signs of forced entry or broken glass. The room was largely intact. However, the wall at the head of the bed continued to attract attention. When the semi-covered curtains were removed, technicians discovered two small holes the size of a ballpoint pen tip, lying horizontally, just inches apart. Outside, the garden leading to the back lawn revealed more clues. Under a low bush, the team found two metal cases that had been slightly dampened by the night dew. The distance from that location to the bedroom window was just enough for a person to stand. The results from the specialized agency showed that Emma did not react after the incident, and the time of death was determined to be after midnight. There were no other signs of collision on the body, other than the main impact that directly affected life. What puzzled the investigators was the manner in which it happened. No noise, no vandalism, and almost no physical evidence in the room. But it was the absolute silence that raised suspicion. Someone had planned it carefully, knew exactly where the bedroom was, and picked the right time, when the family was asleep. That led the police to believe that this was not a spontaneous act. This was preparation. Immediately after completing the crime scene investigation, the authorities began screening those who had the closest contact with the victim. Emma was a well-liked student, with no conflicts with friends or neighbors. All of her social relationships were clean. The name William Riley Gall was quickly placed at the top of the list of people to be investigated first. William was Emma's ex-boyfriend. The relationship between the two had lasted for more than 2 years, but had recently ended. Emma's friends shared that she had felt pressured in the last months of the relationship, often complaining about William's controlling messages and disrespectful behavior. Despite the breakup, William still tried to contact her many times, sometimes even appearing near Emma's house at night. Emma herself had told her close friends that she felt uneasy when she saw strange figures around her house, something that now made investigators particularly concerned. The police decided to invite William to work. During the initial conversation, he appeared calm, claiming that he had nothing to do with the incident. William said that on the night of the incident, he had been at his friend's house, sent a few final messages to Emma, and gone to bed early. This statement did not initially seem suspicious, but when the time of the messages was compared, the police discovered an unreasonable gap of several hours that William could not satisfactorily explain. During subsequent interviews, William began to show inconsistencies. When asked about his grandfather's gun, an item that William had shown off to his friends, he said he did not know where it was and did not use it. However, two of William's close friends, after being questioned in private, revealed that a few days before the incident, William had asked to borrow black clothes and expressed his desire to do something big to attract Emma's attention. One of the two friends also recalled that William had described Emma's bedroom in great detail, including details about the window. From these unusual signs, the investigation agency began to plan further. They asked the two friends to cooperate, wearing recording devices when meeting William, with the aim of finding any loose words. In the recorded conversation, William appeared confused, mentioned the missing gun many times, and worried that the police would find traces. He did not admit it directly, but his roundabout way of speaking, in statements like, "They can't find it if we dump it in the right place," gave the investigation team clear grounds for suspicion. The key point came from a special situation. William, in a panic, called two friends to help him dispose of the evidence. The police monitored the entire movement from a distance. When William arrived at a deserted bridge area at night, He was carrying a cloth bag containing a long, heavy object, a 9mm gun. At that moment, the police intervened and detained William for formal investigation. After being taken to the police station, William refused to provide further information, citing fatigue and the need for a lawyer. However, the evidence was sufficient to conduct an in-depth examination. The recovered gun completely matched the 2 metal casings found at the scene. On the other hand, the black clothes and gloves found in William's car contained paint stains and fabric fibers that matched the material of Emma's bedroom curtains. Careful analysis of the phone device and location data also showed that at the time of the incident, William's phone had been near Emma's house, contrary to his previous testimony. Text messages before and after the incident also showed conflicting emotions, from blame, anger to regret, that are common in cases of emotional instability. In addition to the physical evidence, psychological analysts were called in. They said William's behavior demonstrated a pattern of someone who tends to be controlling in relationships, does not accept rejection, and often reacts in an extreme way to get attention. These descriptions match the previous accounts of Emma's friends, further supporting the idea that the behavior was premeditated, not a spontaneous reaction. Within 2 weeks of the incident, the police had completed a full case file. William Riley Gall was formally charged with multiple counts of taking another person's life, possessing a dangerous instrument, and obstructing an investigation. The investigation file ran to hundreds of pages, including witness statements, audio recordings, physical examination results, and analysis by independent experts. Patience, close coordination, and the use of modern investigative tactics helped the team solve the case step by step. It is worth noting that this was not a harmful act committed in a moment of anger, but a series of deliberately prepared actions. Something that the investigators themselves admitted left them shocked. After months of careful preparation, the trial of William Riley Gall officially began in the spring of 2018 in Knox County. The courtroom was packed. The victim's family sat in the front row, quietly observing every development. On the other side, the defendant sat with his head bowed, his face strangely calm. The prosecutor opened by reenacting the entire investigation, from the discovery of the scene, the process of collecting evidence, to the recordings and witness statements. They emphasized the element of pre-planning and the defendant's ability to control his behavior, thereby arguing that the action was not the result of a moment of loss of control, but the result of a series of careful calculations. The defense attorney focused on the psychological instability, arguing that the client acted in a complex emotional state, not fully aware of the consequences. But the prosecution countered with a series of phone records, location maps, physical evidence, and audio recordings, indisputable evidence of deliberate preparation. One of the most eye-catching moments in court came when text messages between the defendant and the victim were played. They showed a long series of expressions of control and torment, interspersed with apologies and requests to come back. The tone of the voice as he read those messages during the trial brought tears to many in the audience, not just for the loss, but for the warning signs that had been overlooked. After days of debate, the jury moved to the verdict. After just a few hours of deliberation, the verdict was announced. William Riley Gall was convicted of first-degree murder, along with additional charges of disorderly conduct and possession of a dangerous instrument. The sentence was set at life in prison with no parole for at least 51 years. The verdict was met with public approval, but also left a lingering feeling in the community. Many people shared that they had seen the young couple walking together, but had no idea that their relationship contained many signs of instability. The school where Emma had studied held a special memorial service and launched a campaign to raise awareness about healthy relationships among young people. The trial ended, but the echoes of the case still linger. as a profound reminder of the fragile boundaries between teenage love and harmful behavior. Emma Jane Walker left this world at such a young age, with her dreams and future still unfulfilled. Her story is not just a legal document closed with a verdict, but a powerful reminder of what is often overlooked in seemingly harmless relationships. Many people who have seen Emma smiling on the school playground, cheering on her friends, or chatting happily in class would not have guessed that behind that image is a silent journey filled with warning signs. Not everyone knows how to recognize subtle control or emotional manipulation, especially in adolescence, when emotions are unstable and boundaries are still unclear. Family, friends, teachers, those who were close to Emma, all carry regret. If only they could have recognized it sooner. If only they could have intervened in time. But it was they, after the incident, who turned their pain into action. A scholarship fund was established in Emma's memory. Sharing sessions and workshops are held in schools and communities to educate young people about building respectful relationships, knowing how to say no, and listening to unusual expressions from those around them. This story is no longer about an individual or a family. It touches the heart of anyone who has ever been a parent, has passed the age of 16, or has ever placed their trust in first love. Because the line between care and control, between love and possession, is sometimes so thin that we don't even realize it until things can't be turned back. The Emma Walker case, after all, is a tragic song, but also a wake-up call reminding us never to ignore the smallest signs of abnormality.